I adore these landscapes, these rugged and steep cliffs against which the waves of the ocean lovingly embrace, from their union arising those sublime white foams. I have always loved them. As far back as I can remember, the young boy that I was contemplated the wonders of the world through these marine waves. I used to sit cross-legged on the beach, gaze at the horizon, and let my fertile imagination wander. I dreamed of other worlds, other planets bathed by oceans, their sky obscured by immense billows of cottony clouds of immaculate white, other peoples with strange yet familiar customs, other knowledge and powers than ours. Since time immemorial, my family, natives of Thais, the fifth planet orbiting around the double star Archid in the Cassiopeia galaxy, holds the heavy burden of imperial mage. Our knowledge and gifts are the most advanced of our people, and we must constantly provide for the needs of our caste and those of the inhabitants of our planet. From my birth, I was conditioned to assume this responsibility, trained in parallel arts, and in the contemplation and preservation of the works of the grand architect. How many times have I been tested by my tutors? Trials of materialization, projection of my mind through time and space, battles on the material plane and in the ether with certain fierce elementals. Nothing was spared me. For everyone, even of high lineage, cannot access the knowledge of hidden things. One must prove worthy of it. Between lessons, I enjoyed wandering among the aisles of the imperial archives for which my aunt was responsible, devouring all the forbidden works dealing with magic, science, and religion. I even had to learn other languages to decipher them, and it was not without difficulty. That's how I became aware of the immensity of interconnected universes and the smallness of my own being. As time passed, the pressure exerted on me intensified, and I longed more and more to reach my adulthood to be able to leave this world that oppressed me and explore the vast expanses of interstellar space beyond the galactic wall. I had expressed my desire to leave many times, but I was made to understand that it could not be realized, for I was the sole heir of my order, and an entire people awaited me to fulfill my charge as best as I could. Thus, with each mistake, with each disappointment, I came here, to this beach, to take refuge. Rocked by the waves lapping, my mind wandering between two worlds, one day I fell asleep, and that's when she appeared to me. How beautiful she was, mysterious, and yet so familiar. I felt like I had known her forever. I felt such a deep connection that I felt like our thoughts were one. My whole being vibrated in her presence, so radiant with light and glory. But where was she? In what time, in what world, in what galaxy did she live? The sky of her universe proudly bore several moons, and the waves of a calm ocean made her frail silhouette sway. I had never seen such an environment, and I was quite unable to locate her, to my infinite disappointment. Years passed, the burden became heavier and heavier, and her image became more and more present in my mind. When I reached adulthood, I was allowed to embark on a study trip to Galimede, at the edge of our solar system. As much as Thais was a world dedicated to the spiritual, Galimede was oriented towards science and technology. I was delighted to momentarily extricate myself from my obligations and to study with their finest scientists. Upon my arrival, I found landscapes very different from those I knew. Gigantic cities, vehicles moving in a laden sky, immense crowds moving in long arcades in such perfect order that one would have thought they were synchronized with each other. And indeed, they were. The Galimedians were all connected to a central intelligence that provided them with information and directives and monitored their slightest physical and spiritual deviations. No individual freedom on Galimede, but a collective consciousness acting in concert for the advancement of the community. My tutors were stricter with me, even more so than on Thais, considering me as a sub-being because I refused to have the device implanted that would connect me to the grand whole, to the central intelligence of the planet. As time passed, my despair and enslavement grew as my illusions faded, and the memory of her face faded away. During an exchange with the rector of the academy to which I was assigned, I understood that mine had concluded a pact with those of Galimede. They wished to experiment on my being the fusion between a spiritual development at its peak controlled by a central intelligence, leaving little room for personal desires and aspirations. A fusion of civilizations and destinies, so to speak. When I realized that the universe into which I had been sent was even more coercive than mine, immense despair overwhelmed me, but the feeling of revolt that inhabited me was stronger, and from then on, I sought a way to escape from this hostile and oppressive environment. Through chance encounters, I met Zareth, a scientist who had worked on a spatiotemporal portal for the needs of the Grand Hull community. Zareth was not like the other Galimedians, his implant being somewhat defective. We quickly became friends, and I shared with him my desire to escape. By the favor of a millennial astral conjunction, Zareth decided to help me escape from his world. He led me to his laboratory so that I could cross the threshold of time and space through a colossal intergalactic portal. Thus equipped with my spatiotemporal suit, I crossed the limits of that cold and soulless universe without any regret. An immense sphere of absolute black surrounded by a spiral of undulating flames appeared to me then, and as an immeasurable power drew me to it, I felt my entire being disintegrate fragment by fragment. First, I saw my limbs distort and elongate infinitely, and I felt my mind fragment and scatter in all directions of space and time. For a brief moment, I felt intimately connected to the Grand Architect, knowing and feeling everything simultaneously. I was all at once a Zarian of Ties, my native planet, and a multitude. Ural from the continent between the oceans, Soptek from Heliopolis, Blanche from Auten, Katerina from Prague, and Saul Racket from London. This fleeting impression gave way to a total obliteration of my existence when the absolute blackness engulfed me. Dazzling lines of light traversed the parallel space in an endless spiral, eventually converging on a toroidal megastructure through which I caught a glimpse of the final destination of my astonishing journey. I had recently regained my senses, and the visual illusions of my distorted body through the portal had just faded. I could now clearly discern a rocky planet facing me, which at that precise moment seemed particularly inhospitable. Immense spiral galaxies, nebulae, and a few solitary planets completed this exceptional panorama. What a cosmic journey! I had transitioned from a state of sub-being in a world highly connected and controlled by a central artificial intelligence to that of a wandering space explorer in the icy solitude of an astonishing void of interstellar space. My space-time journey was not to end there, it seems. Indeed, as I approached the megastructure, I caught sight of immense spacecraft stationed and orbiting nearby, towards which my spacesuit propelled me at a gradually decreasing speed. Bright swirls of light seemed to bend around ships, distorting space-time to propel them at superluminal speeds, and I understood then that my cosmic journey would conclude aboard one of these vessels. Indeed, as I approached a spaceport with a multitude of transparent pods emitting a pale blue light, my wild course froze at one of these spacesuit docking stations. Thousands of other space travelers were by my side. After a certain amount of time, which I was not then able to quantify, and while other suits were returning to their pods, the starlight suddenly changed shape and color, space and time folded into a blue and glowing tunnel, and our journey through the universe began, heading towards a new unknown world. Once again, I lost consciousness. Eons seemed to have passed since our departure from the galactic portal. As I gradually awoke, the pod that sheltered me opened, and my suit detached to propel me through space towards a new planet. The atmospheric journey was particularly challenging. This world of rock, ice, and carbon dioxide gas, however, was breathtakingly beautiful. I descended and soon landed in a valley between snow-covered mountains. A sky of deep black, dotted with sparkling stars, hosted what seemed to be a bluish moon whose light faintly illuminated the surrounding landscape, while huge rocky structures roared in the absolute silence of fire and light flashes. I found other fellow travelers on the rocky path I undertook, and we traversed vast icy expanses before arriving at the first organized structure, the city of Candith. This planet was, without a doubt, particularly hostile to our forms of life, yet highly developed. Candith was splendid. Megalithic structures resembling gigantic skyscrapers, spaceports with numerous ships landing or taking off in an intoxicating dance all around us, an icy ground reflecting the pale lights of the sky. Such was the first vision of this city that we had. But this city also seemed to have suffered the ravages of destruction. Many structures were in ruins on Candith. Here and there, plasma flames consumed monuments, the ground was littered with rocks and debris, and one clearly felt in danger if one were to venture too long in this inhospitable world. I understood upon my arrival that this city would not be my ultimate destination but a step in my journey through space and time. As we progressed within the city, we encountered several life forms with appearances very different from ours, monstrous, gigantic, and above all very aggressive towards us. As these creatures approached us, we quickened our pace and began to run to escape a gruesome fate. Thus, I lost my fellow travelers, and my wanderings in this hostile city began. Randomly, I wandered between constructions and icy roads, trying to orient myself, seeking to approach a spaceport without attracting attention. As I prepared to enter the spaceport, I saw another life form, somewhat different from the first, busy preparing ships for the great leap through space. More humanoid, Seeming less aggressive, clad in a spacesuit different from mine, they appeared to be the masters of the planet, while the monstrous creatures that had caused our dispersal undoubtedly served as its guardians. One of them noticed me. His gaze froze me. I should have started running to escape, but I was not capable. I was paralyzed by fear. He approached me and showed no hostility. As he came closer, I noticed his curious anatomy. The lights of the sky and stars reflected on the visor of his suit's helmet, while the ballet of ships taking off towards the stars colored the sky with an orange fire. He began to transmit information to me. Without speaking a word, he mentally conveyed to me that I could not stay here and that I must continue my journey. He guided me towards the entrance of a building sinking deeply beneath the frozen surface of the planet and urged me to enter. I had no choice but to comply. As I wandered through dark corridors, I noticed in the distance a strange blue-orange glow. I quickened my pace and entered a room of cyclopean dimensions, its walls adorned with a multitude of frescoes. Driven by curiosity, I began to decipher one of these frescoes. It depicted strange creatures traversing space to settle on a planet made of rock and water in order to extract minerals, while others reshaped the planetary landscape through terraforming to make it suitable for colonization. And yet others created different life forms, instruments of their works. The appearance of these created life forms stunned me. They were in my image, without a doubt. As I turned to contemplate the thousands of other frescoes I had yet to decipher, I noticed behind me a glow approaching rapidly. It was the wall of the room closing in on me, and my living space was dangerously diminishing. I began to run towards the blue-orange light facing me, narrowly escaping being crushed. I entered a vast hall whose colored light of deep blue and flashes revealed two perpendicular toroidal structures, a plasma well topped with an arch resembling a portal. Approaching the well, I saw intense light swirling in arcs, and a holographic projection soon faced me. It was a woman of my species. She stood there before me, seeming to have awaited me for ages. She had familiar features, brunette with azure eyes, not wearing a spacesuit but clothes I had never seen before, of a luminous electric blue. I felt an immediate connection with her. I was at ease, and my fear faded away. I don't know what came over me, but I removed the helmet of my spacesuit, and as I realized my fatal mistake and prepared to succumb to the lack of breathable atmosphere, I noticed that this room, whose walls had been sealed by the movements of the previous room's wall, now contained an atmosphere compatible with my physiological needs. I could breathe the surrounding air. The image of the woman in blue faded, and on the walls of the room, a door opened. Behind this door, a vast wardrobe with dark and strange clothes. Suddenly, the plasma well and the arch above it began to spin at an increasingly rapid pace, and the plasma it contained was transferred from the well to the arch. The well sank into the ground as a stone-paved path appeared, closing it. I understood that the portal to another world had just been activated, and that to be able to take it, I would have to leave my spacesuit and don attire more suitable for my journey. I chose a long black cloak that I put on, and after pulling the hood over my head, I headed towards the portal, having no possibility of turning back. As I approached, I saw in a whirl of fire and light the new worlds towards which I was heading. Upon crossing the portal, I once again lost consciousness. When I awoke, my surroundings had changed radically. I found myself within a large, damp rocky cavity filled with trees bearing pastel foliage, softly illuminated by strange luminescent photophores. The walls were adorned with frescoes depicting marine creatures and giant humanoid beings traversing vast expanses of water aboard flying vehicles. The stone arches of the portal that had allowed me to enter this world had lost their luminescence, and the portal was now closed. I felt somewhat different. Deep down, I knew who I was, Azarian, native of Thais, but my mind now had access to new knowledge, new information about the world I now inhabited. I was also Ural, imperial mage of the continental city between oceans, Atlantis. Thus, the knowledge and powers of Azarian and those of Ural circulated within my entire being, and far from experiencing a split personality, I had achieved the perfect fusion of two distinct forms of life within a single entity. I felt particularly invigorated by this unique novelty. Ural had prayed and performed incantations before the portal, calling and hoping for the aid of higher forces, and his wish had been granted, in a way. It was not a god who stood before Ural, but rather myself, incarnated in one of my multiple existences across time and space. I was Ural, I was Azarian, I was multitude, all at once. I knew I had to quickly leave this room and speak with the Emperor on a matter of utmost importance. As I traversed the streets of the city, memories of Ural surged into my mind in staggering flashes. Atlantis was a magnificent city, a circular city where authority was exerted in a centripetal and totalitarian manner, with commoners inhabiting the periphery and the imperial and priestly elite at the center. Vast canal systems connected the different parts of this gigantic city, and the means of communication and transportation were simply astonishing. Majestic ships traversed the vast marine expanses, while graceful aircraft crossed the sky in perfect silence. The city's energy resources came from a strange crystal that, once processed and exposed to sunlight, provided colossal energy, which could be used to heat and illuminate buildings, move, transform, and transmute materials, propel vehicles, but unfortunately also serve as a weapon of unparalleled destruction. No centralized intelligence in Atlantis, but rather absolute imperial power inherited from divine ancestors who came from the stars. The emperors of Atlantis had the blue blood. Indeed, they were hybrids between creatures from other worlds and the indigenous population of the planet, artificially created through genetic engineering and retained some marks and attributes. Especially the high copper content in their blood, the mark of absolute nobility, as well as fabulous powers over matter and beings. The Atlanteans worshipped the sacred bull and the god of the ocean depths, Gaddle, primordial entities also shaped by the ancestral creators. They had erected a vast system of interconnected pyramids for collecting and dispensing the energy from the sacred crystal as well as the psychic energy of the faithful. The system of power exercise was particularly severe. At the top of the social ladder, the ruling caste, the emperor, the legitimate heir of the ancestral lineage of the original creators, with absolute power. The empress, his divine wife, also descended from the creators, but whose mixed blood did not allow her to exercise power. Finally, the imperial mage, selected from all created beings from generation to generation as the most adept at mastering the power of the sacred crystal. If the powers of the emperor and the empress were unparalleled, those of the imperial mage had little to envy them. Capable of mastering the power of the crystal, he could control the elements, distort time and space, mentally project himself to other worlds, physically move over great distances in a flash, and materialize at will whatever he desired. I was Ural, the imperial mage, and I could do all these things. I had already been compelled by the emperor to unleash torrents of flames and devastating tsunamis upon our enemies, the Muons, to definitively resolve the conflict that opposed us, to my ineffable horror, thus killing millions of innocent beings. Is it better to try to save those dear to us and bring about the demise of a civilization, or to resist the bloodthirsty blindness of a despot and thereby condemn our own and the entirety of our people? Of course, this did not have the desired effect, and the conflict hardened irreversibly. The cruelty, greed, and thirst for conquest of the emperor knew no bounds. As I traversed the city streets, I observed its inhabitants. They seemed downtrodden, and in each of their gestures, one could feel the weight of imperial authority paralyzing them a little more each day. Rebellion simmered among the citizens, and some hoped to one day overthrow the central power, particularly by forming alliances with our enemies, the Muons. Many spies and traitors to the emperor had established themselves at the imperial court, and one had to be very cautious in the exchanges one could have, even with those deemed trustworthy. A consortium of conspirators had even requested an audience with me, imploring me to join their cause, which I refused, believing that domination by a foreign power was not a liberation solution for an oppressed people. Furthermore, the enemy leader was no more protective of his people than our own emperor, blinded as he was by his thirst for power and domination. The Muons dreamed of seizing our sacred crystal, the source of our power and prosperity, and for millennia had sought by all means to conquer us, fortunately without success. My mental projections beyond the veil of reality indicated to me an imminent catastrophe, which would take the form of a massive and total conflict between peoples and would end in the eradication of all civilizations on the planet. I had requested an audience with the emperor to inform him of this prediction and thus headed towards the palace. Finally arrived, I entered the judgment hall where the emperor resided. The emperor sat on his throne of crystal and gold, proud, haughty, his divine condition and origins having shaped his character over the centuries spent exercising absolute power. He did not even listen to what I had to say, demanding ever more power from me to destroy cities, engulf warships, and destroy the resources of our enemies. I could not reason with him. Indicating to him that his blindness would inexorably lead to our downfall, he threatened me directly and ordered me to obey him. Although he was the emperor, he could not easily destroy me, as I controlled, through my will, knowledge, and powers, all the power of the city. But he could exert pressure on my entourage and torture and execute mine, as he had already done when I had tried to resist him. My wife and children had paid with their lives for my brief rebellion. Disheartened, I left the judgment hall and requested an audience with the Empress for her to try to reason with her divine husband. The apartments of the Empress adjoined the judgment hall. There, she sat on a throne of lapis lazuli and gold, surrounded by the glory of her divine ancestors. She cared little for her husband's concerns, preferring to indulge in cruel and perverse games with the population. How many servants had perished? For a simple oversight, a direct look, or for daring to address her. She was formidable and feared by all. She delighted in contemplating the fear she inspired in others, pushing individuals to their limits, then punishing them severely to savor their suffering. I had had little opportunity to associate with her and had never requested an audience, but the situation called for exceptional measures, and I had to make her understand the imminent danger looming for all the peoples of the planet. She showed total indifference to the situation and to the future looming for all the peoples of the planet, arguing her divine essence and quasi-immortality. She ordered me to leave the palace and to do what the emperor had asked of me. When I left the palace, I was desperate and distraught. I went to meditate at the top of the sacred mountain, housing the source of the sacred crystal, and locked myself in. My projections indicated that the apocalypse of our world was about to begin. I assessed the possibilities and the chances of success for a definitive solution: the assassination of the imperial couple or the destruction of the source of Atlantean power, the sacred crystal. It was not possible to attack the existence of the imperial couple, their quasi-divine nature preserving them from any destructive attack. As for the destruction of the crystal, it would lead to the end of the conflict at the cost of the enslavement of the Atlantean people by the Muons and thus place another tyrant in power. None of these solutions seemed pertinent. Action had to be taken, and quickly. As I focused on possible futures, the sound of a vast explosion shook the walls of the cave in which I had taken refuge. I understood, too late, that the Emperor and the Empress had decided to do without my services and had initiated Armageddon against the Muons. The Empress was an astral mage with colossal powers, much more developed than those of the Emperor himself. The Emperor, well aware of his wife's perverse inclinations, had easily convinced her to emerge from her usual lethargy to unleash all her fury on the peoples of the other continent, making her the instrument of mass destruction he needed. Having, like me, the ability to project her being wherever she desired, she targeted the cities of Mu and unleashed an ocean of flames that destroyed everything in its path. The Muons' counterattack was not long in coming, and they sent projectiles at the city, destroying the infrastructure and decimating the people. Only the sacred mountain was spared, as they wished to be able to recover the source of power, the sacred crystal. I watched, horrified, this appalling spectacle. Within the city, the losses were immeasurable. Men, women, and children of the people had perished. Some of the ruling caste and a few aristocrats found refuge in underground shelters, while others embarked on their personal vessels for permanent exile. After this brief exodus of our city, our majestic ships and aircraft, our communication routes, and our power pyramids, nothing remained. The Emperor decided to counterattack using his ultimate weapon, inherited from his creator ancestors and dormant for eons, the god Gath. Gath was a monstrous deity that slumbered in the depths of the ocean between the continents. It had been fashioned by the ancients to control the minds of creatures designed to serve them by channeling their dreams and nightmares. Only the Emperor had the power to invoke Gath, and he did so. A colossal and monstrous entity awakened and flew over the ocean, causing a titanic tidal wave that engulfed almost the entire planet in an instant. Then it seized the imperial couple, who admired it, and finally flew into the sky and disappeared. The post-apocalyptic world that lay before my eyes froze me with horror. No trace remained of our civilizations, no more Atlanteans, no more Muons. Water covered almost the entire planet. Here and there, one could still glimpse the peaks of the ancient Atlantean mountains, appearing as frail reefs within an endless ocean. And the same was true for the Muon peaks. Focusing my mind on the future, I knew that some nobles and leaders had survived and would be the founders of new civilizations to come. Some of them being hybrids, the blue blood should be able to endure for a little while longer. I had not been able to prevent the cataclysm, so I had nothing more to do in this world. Heading for the portal room one last time, I invoked the power of the crystal and opened a breach through space and time, into which I plunged, preparing to merge once again with another me, somewhere at another time. The water in the courtyard basin of the temple, upon which I had leaned, rippled in concentric circles, reflecting a distorted image of my face back at me. An eerie sensation enveloped me. Where was I? Who was I? There was a vague sense of déjà vu about this environment. My mind wandered as I watched the sinuous waves formed by the moving circles of water. They morphed into vast temples atop mountains surrounded by oceans, ships traversing the waves and the skies, then into flames, lightning, explosions, and a titanic deluge engulfing all forms of life. Frightening visions of obscure memories surfaced in my foggy mind. Something urged me to delve deeper into my consciousness, but a mental barrier prevented me from seeing anything other than these images. I felt like I came from elsewhere, from the depths of the night sky, from those luminaries that dot the starry vault, yet I couldn't focus my attention to try to clarify this impression. Then the ripples in the basin's water smoothed out, and a clearer image reflected back at me. Gazing at myself, I snapped back to my senses in an instant. I was Soptek, a priest of the Temple of Horus, and within me resided the imperial mage Ural, who had witnessed the horrors of the Atlantean destruction, likely leaving an indelible mark on my spirit and wounded heart. Everything became clear to my eyes now. Soptek had a mission in this world, entrusted by the highest authority, Queen Selene, regent of all the gnomes of Egypt. He had to retrieve the book, a collection of sacred papyri kept at the Temple of Ra in Onu, also known as Heliopolis by the Lagids, the dynasty of Ptolemaic descendants, to use it to consecrate the naos of the Temple of Edfu, erected relatively recently compared to the millennia-old monuments of the Giza Plateau. The Temple of Ra in Onu was a relic of the ancient world. The first temple to worship Ra, Adam, and Khepri, the primordial solar triad, it had once shone brightly and shaped the original Egyptian kingdom. Its archives also preserved ancient knowledge, and neophytes came there to undergo the trials of initiation in its deadly dark corridors. There was no room for failure at the end of the initiation. Either the candidate overcame the trials and underwent the ascension of the Ba, the awakening of consciousness, or they failed and perished in the limbo of eternal movement. The task entrusted to Soptek, to me, was of the utmost importance and extremely perilous, as the treasure trove of knowledge housed in the temple was coveted by multiple hostile factions: warrior, initiatic, priestly, and mercantile. I had to act in the shadows, alone, without drawing attention to myself. The temple was situated in an oasis within a compound protected by tetrahedrons, shielding from profane eyes the sacred beauty it contained. The Holy of Holies, the naos, located at the center of the structure, was topped by a pyramid whose iridescent apex radiated the light of Ra in all directions. To enter, for staircases were guarded by colossal guardian heads, one facing each cardinal point, while the pyramidion pointed toward the zenith, in the constellation of Cassiopeia, and the nadir at the base of the structure. Surrounded by moats filled with water and voracious reptiles rooted in the primordial chaos. One had to carefully choose the entrance to access the naos, considering seasonal parameters, astral conjunctions, but also the very nature of one's own conscious will to succeed. Only those whose intentions were clear and whose minds had been illuminated by the essence of Ra could open the sealed doors. Within the naos, deeply nestled within a labyrinth of vast underground galleries, shelves filled with papyrus scrolls and various objects stretched as far as the eye could see. A wan light of pale blue emitted by curious incandescent photophores faintly illuminated the different alcoves. In these papyri lay all the teachings, mysteries, and scrolls of power from the known past and present world. Some were written in hieratic and demotic in Greek, others in cuneiform, still others with certain unique glyphs, which the consciousness of Ural inhabiting me recognized as of Atlantean origin. I immediately knew which gallery to traverse to obtain the collection that Queen Selene had asked me to retrieve. Wrapping the precious tome and concealing it within the folds of my long linen robe, I could finally depart the premises. However, I must not, under any circumstances, expose the compendium to an unconsecrated space, lest the glyphs it contained fade away forever. Therefore, I could not consult it until I reached my ultimate destination, the Temple of Edfu. Queen Selene, current regent of the gnomes since her husband the pharaoh perished in a bloody battle against the enemy, harbored the ambition of unleashing the light of Ra from the single eye of Horus, to make the Temple of Edfu the mystic capital of the entire country. Queen Selene was a wise monarch, concerned about the well-being of her subjects, possessing remarkable intelligence, and particularly adept at diplomacy. She was beloved by her people, not only because she embodied the divine essence of the goddess Isis in this world, but also because of her great qualities of empathy and conciliation. A powerful aura emanated from her, and Ural's consciousness sensed in her the traces of the Atlantean blue blood he had encountered elsewhere in another time. She sought by all means to reconcile differences among peoples and preferred hard but fruitful negotiation to devastating and despotic war fury. Her young son, the future pharaoh, was carefully educated in the arts and sciences, and she made sure to cultivate in him a political critical mindset, urging him to always see beyond the deceptive appearance of human intentions and maneuvers. Naturally, Selene was envied, hated by her detractors and opponents, who conspired and plotted for her downfall. But fortified by a cohesive priestly system aligned with her cause and a loyal armed force, she ruled as a wise and absolute mistress over all of Egypt. Selene had entrusted me with other significant missions in the past, notably that of enriching the country and its inhabitants without having to conquer additional territories or exploit the buried riches of the copper and gold mines at the cost of deadly labor exploitation. As a priest of Horus, I had been initiated into the art of energy and matter transformation, and I had been able to produce for the queen precious stones and metals such as gold and emeralds in phenomenal quantities, with the gems being sold or exchanged by approved merchants of the royal administration throughout the country, thus enriching the reserves of the royal treasury. It was within the temple of Edfu that I had acquired these knowledge, passed down from generation to generation of initiates into the mysteries of the primordial matrix. And it had cost me greatly in my flesh and in my being before I could fully master the entirety of the operative processes and rituals. These processes were engraved on the walls of the temple's laboratory, which had been allocated to me as a creation space in service to the queen. Though in coded language, they were accessible to any initiate who mastered the powers of the matrix. The laboratory was also the place where sacred perfumes and ointments were concocted, used by physicians and priests to heal the various wounds that occasionally ravaged our country and its inhabitants. Among other things, there were developed the elixir of remembrance, used to resurrect ancient occulted knowledge, the elixir of projection, allowing one to project their consciousness beyond the veil of space and time, the elixir of materialization, which, combined with the use of the matrix, allowed the transmutation of sand into gold, and finally the elixir of long life, which allowed the prolongation of existence far beyond the usual human lifespan. With certain other carefully selected priests, I was tasked with developing these elixirs and bending the matrix to materialize the will of my sovereign. The journey back from Ona to Edfu was far from easy. I had to employ cunning to avoid drawing attention to myself, disguising myself at times as a beggar, at others as a merchant, in order to regain the sacred enclosure of my temple. Upon arrival, I proceeded to the naos of the temple to consult the sacred tome and undertake the ultimate consecration of the naos, in order to open the portal between worlds and epochs, as my sovereign had requested of me. I set to work, invoking the hidden powers of the matrix, dissolving raw and primal materials, coagulating astral energies, uniting opposites to create the bicephalic, the being with the double eagle head, the powerful symbol that would materialize the portal in this place. Just as I was about to utter the ultimate incantation, I had a terrifying vision. A foreign army was on the brink of invading and exterminating us. It would soon be repelled by the Queen's army, but the enemy soldiers would have time to seize the bicephalic and the sacred tome to offer them to their king. I realized the magnitude of the conspiracy, the Queen's opponents conspiring with the enemies of the throne to orchestrate a fatal attack that would annihilate Selene's glorious project, the consecration of Horus in the light of Atumri. The warrior king behind this plot was none other than the one who had slain Pharaoh, Selene's husband, and he was planning an invasion and total extermination of our people, our traditions, and our culture. He had been preparing for this for decades, inheriting a hatred that his ancestors harbored towards ours, and had raised a colossal and formidable army to annihilate us. Although they did not possess specific powers or resources to give them any military advantage, they were fierce soldiers, and their architect-inventors had developed attack techniques and tools of destruction unmatched by any known to date. This made them formidable adversaries. As I snapped out of my vision, I rushed to inform the high priest of the temple of the imminent threat. Already aware of this assault, he informed me that the bulk of the enemy army had been halted at our border, but a small group of fighters had managed to escape the vengeance of our soldiers and were heading straight for the temple. I understood that it was my duty to secure the sacred tome and the bicephalic so that they could never be seized. As enemy soldiers had just breached the main entrance of the temple and were now entering its precincts, closely followed by our royal soldiers in hot pursuit, I managed to escape through the temple's maze of columns and the citadel's alleys, seeking to stay out of reach of their spears and scimitars. A chariot stood ready to serve as my means of transportation, allowing me to speed swiftly towards the naos of Heliopolis, which only I could enter to conceal the two sacred artifacts. After a long and perilous journey, upon reaching the naos, I first placed back the sacred tome and sealed the bicephalic at the bottom of a well. Winding through the corridors, I then noticed a door concealed behind a stele engraved with Atlantean glyphs. Deep within my being, I knew that this door concealed another portal that would once again allow me to traverse the spaces between worlds and epochs, transporting me to another version of myself. My mind urged me to dress appropriately for the journey. Donning an array left there by an illustrious unknown predecessor, I masked my face with some whitening pigment, but neglected to don the protective headgear accompanying the passage attire. As I closed the portal behind me, I felt a powerful wave disturb my mind, and while I was disoriented, I realized too late the necessity of proper protection for my head. My consciousness dissolved once more, carrying away the memories and recollections of my previous beings. I knew then that of Ural of Soptek, soon there would be no trace remaining.
Standing before the flames of the Athenor, I awoke with a bewildered mind, gathering the faint memories of the strange dream I had just experienced. Roaming through the arid and desolate expanses separating two sacred sites, receptacles of the divine light, which seemed strangely familiar, I had managed to escape the assassination attempts that had been made against me. I still visualized those alcoves nestled within gigantic galleries where ritual objects were meticulously arranged, but I couldn't focus my attention more precisely to locate the place of their confinement. Barely a collection of parchment, an object resembling a two-headed raptor glimpsed, and my vision inevitably blurred. I stood for a moment, contemplating the flames of the hearth, not knowing who I truly was, and what I was doing in this place. Suddenly, a flash of clarity enlightened my mind. I was Blanche of Autun, the illegitimate daughter of Duke Robert of Burgundy, exiled to this place, the Templar Commandery of Beaune, for several years now. The allies of my illustrious progenitor had conspired and had me expelled from the court of the duchy when I was but a child. My brother Gregoire, my only loving family in this hostile world, had taken me under his protection, just as he had been knighted into the Templar Order. Thus, I spent these few years hidden from hostile eyes in the shadows of the Templar commanderies. Many times we had to traverse the moor to escape those who wished to see me perish, including my own illustrious progenitor, for I was deemed a potential threat to the inheritance of his noble lineage. Robert's warlike inclinations led him to wage war in distant lands, plundering, destroying, violating, and massacring everything in his path. And when he returned to his domain, his fury could find no rest but in torturing, tormenting, and annihilating with his own hands any being he deemed inferior. How many pages, how many servants were slain by his wrath? How many maids, how many ladies-in-waiting were irreparably defiled by his repeated, degrading, and depraved assaults? We settled here, in this commandery, thanks to the complicity of the Grand Master of the Temple, Jacques de Molay, whom Robert saw as a fierce and obstinate adversary. The Grand Master took a liking to me and allowed me access to an education befitting my noble status. In the archives of the temple, I studied sciences, arts, dogma, and became accustomed to deciphering ancient parchments inscribed with obscure inscriptions. I easily and quickly mastered them, gaining access to knowledge hidden from common understanding. I remember loving to hide behind the grills between the columns during sacred rituals, spying and apprehending so many forbidden things, so many things that my status as a lady, noble though it may be, would never have allowed me to glimpse otherwise. Thus, I attended knighting ceremonies and official ceremonies, but also higher rites specifically performed to bring prosperity and victory to the knights of the order. Years passed, and I developed certain gifts for clairvoyance, clairaudience, mastery of divine energy, and its projection into base matter for the transmutation of bodies and essences. The power of my abilities grew each day, and it became increasingly difficult for the masters of the order to compel me to keep my existence and powers secret. Above all, I aspired to help those who had taken me in, cherished me, and educated me. I thus put my gifts and knowledge into practice to ensure success and glory for the order's endeavors. As I reached adulthood, the Grand Master unofficially appointed me guardian of the order's secrets. Because of my unique gift of focusing divine energy, I was capable of projecting bolts of fire and light at anyone attempting to breach the sealed doors of the temple. I welcomed the novices, prepared them, and guided them through the labyrinth of the Commandery towards their future initiation. In conducting preliminary interrogations to separate the wheat from the chaff, I occasionally escorted a lost soul to the door, or severely punished an audacious impostor. Indeed, many from noble or common backgrounds envied the wealth and power of the temple, starting with my progenitor Robert and the good King of France, Philip IV the Fair. It was rumored that Philip was plotting treachery to seize the wealth of the order, and I sensed that my progenitor would contribute to what could be the extinction of our organization. Philip had incurred significant debts to the Templars. Simply unwilling to honor his loans, he feared that the Templars would become more powerful than him. That's why I took my task so seriously, excelling in uncovering spies and other wrongdoers coveting the secrets of the order. It was October 1307, more precisely in the morning of Thursday, October 12th, and I was eagerly awaiting the return of my brother Gregoire. Gregoire was a noble knight, pure and audacious, always ready to defend the widow and the orphan. He had distinguished himself with his heroic deeds during glorious epics narrated by the minstrels of the Duchy of Burgundy, making him a living legend. Weary of rides and conquests, Gregoire felt the need to develop his spirituality in the service of the community. He first considered entering the clergy, but his impetuous nature could not reconcile itself to an existence solely focused on the contemplation of divine works. So, he applied and joined the Order of the Warrior Monks, and was knighted into the Templar Order in May of that same year. His official mission was to secure the trade routes of the Duchy of Burgundy, accompanying caravans on paths filled with rogues and cutthroats. Unofficially, he had been entrusted with the quest for the Stone of Blood, a mythical artifact that bestowed upon its possessor the ability to transmute all base metals into pure gold and to prolong life. This stone was sought after by numerous factions throughout the known world, in France, in Europe, and across the seas to Egypt and Jerusalem. This had prompted the Knights of the Stone to participate in the early Crusades. Since then, so many years had passed without the stone ever being discovered. For the stone, I knew from my clairvoyant gifts, was not an object of the physical world, waiting for some seeker of truth to seize it, but a grace granted by the divine to the honest laborer, an illumination of being, an immaterial concept of unrealized potentialities awaiting the masterful hand of the skilled experimenter to materialize. The stone thus resided in every speck of dust, in every rock lying on the ground, in every rainbow coloring a rainy sky, in every gleam of a starry celestial vault. Our alchemist Galimede, obsessed with the quest for the stone, had also made this significant discovery and had an intuition of a new path of realization for the materialization of the stone. He had then summoned Gregoire to procure the various salts, earths, and waters he would need for the great concoction. Unfortunately, these substances were quite rare, and scattered to the four corners of the duchy. The quest would take some time before it could materialize. Gregoire had been gone for 3 months now. 3 long months during which his absence had deeply marked my heart and soul. Certainly, Gregoire was my brother, and I admired him boundlessly, but he was also, in my eyes, my everything, the one who had taken me in, loved me, educated me, protected me, and made me grow. Sharing common aspirations, sense of humor, and conception of existence and duty, Gregoire was indeed more than my brother. He was another version of myself, my spiritual double. A loving and protective double. All the Knights of the Stone awaited Gregoire's return eagerly, and he was finally due to return tonight. We had prepared a ceremony and a banquet in his honor, bustling here in the chapel of the Commandery to put the final touches on the ritual furnishings, there in the banquet hall to arrange the furniture and dishes in the most refined and graceful manner. As for me, I was feverish at the thought of seeing him again. Such a long absence had been almost unbearable, and I had to use my gifts as best as I could to know every day if he was well, where he was, and what he was doing there. The other knights even nicknamed me the White Mage, so strange did I seem to them during my sessions of mental concentration, searching for the presence and activities of my brother. Finally, Gregoire arrived, and as he entered the Commandery, his troubled air heightened my concern and perplexity. Why was he like this? What had he discovered during this quest? Was he returning without having been able to gather the precious components for the future concoction? My intuition was of no use to me then. He requested an audience with the Grand Master, and after his interview, he came to find me at the doors of the sanctuary which I guarded. I then questioned him about his strange demeanor and its reasons. He informed me that while he had indeed been able to bring Galimede all the components for the coction, his travels and bivouacs at the borders of other domains of the duchy had taught him that an irresistible threat would soon descend upon our order. The king had ordered the arrest tomorrow at the crack of dawn of all the Knights Templar, the confiscation of their goods, and their submission to the question by the inquisitors. I had to prepare for the worst, and gather my belongings to be able to flee as quickly as possible if these threats were to be executed. Before I could leave, I had to help Galimede realize the great coction. He would need my gifts of clairvoyance and energy channeling to give body and life to the double being, the primordial essence and soul of the Stone of Blood. For his part, my brother would ensure our safety for the time needed to accomplish this great work, standing guard at the entrance to our laboratory. We spent the night toiling over the alembics, athanors, and crucibles of all kinds. Having chosen to work, given the little time we had left, in the fulgurant way, we had to pay particular attention to the dosage and manipulation of the substances we used, under the threat of untimely explosions. Reddish smoke spiraled from the lids of the crucibles as we heard the raw material cry out in agony. Having extracted the beautiful body by separating it from its wickedness, we subjected it to the outrageous leonine aggression of the Emerald of the Wise, then began the cyclo-continuous ascension and precipitation of the raptors until we obtained the pilot fish that would guide our steps for the pursuit of the work. As the fish began to appear floating in a molten ocean, the crucible shattered, unleashing a deluge of fire, flames, and lightning within our den. All hope of success had now vanished. I left Galimede's lair disheartened and dejected. Our failure boded ill for the assaults we were about to endure. It was dawn. The rays of a newborn sun illuminated the nocturnal sky with a pale red-orange hue, and as it rose in the sky, a clamor grew louder in our ears. Preparing for the impending battle, I donned my armor and strode confidently towards the entrance of the hall that I had to defend, determined to fight to save our order. The soldiers were there, at the entrance of the Commandery, led by the bailiff to our threshold on the orders of King Philip. We heard the cries of rage from the soldiers, the collapses of walls and rocks of our enclosure, the suffocations and moans of the first line of knights defending the courtyard. As they penetrated into the inner courtyard, the fury of their steps accompanying them made the walls of the building tremble with a gloomy tone. Their eyes fixed on me. They were initially taken aback, then decided to rush in my direction. Gregoire joined me and pulled me by the hand, then began to run swiftly to evade their attack. We couldn't go far, as other soldiers arrived, facing us and encircling us. As I prepared to channel all my energy to propel them with a deadly discharge, a lance stuck in Gregoire's arm, who, destabilized, let go of my hand. He fell to the ground, and totally taken aback by what I had just seen, I did not have the opportunity to launch my deadly attack. Other soldiers arrived at our level, and plunged their swords into Gregoire's side, who succumbed almost instantly. I could not contain their fury. They surrounded me, subdued me, and beating me mercilessly, dragged me into a dark corner of the inner courtyard. They had decided to punish me according to my sins. A Templar woman could only be a minion of Satan, in the service of the debauchery of a depraved and sodomite order. There, as they took turns torturing me, others defiled my intimacy with their seed, I saw the pyre they prepared for me. When they had their fill of their outrages, they led me to the pyre, tied me up, and lit a fire that would soon consume me whole. As the flames roasted my flesh and liquefied my azure eyes and blonde hair, a last surge of energy allowed me to cast a spell to project my essence to leave this world and carry me beyond the veil of time and space, to another form of existence. Thus, as I lost consciousness, I saw myself vowing a fierce and absolute hatred to all the men of this earth, cursing them forever, swearing to make them pay 100-fold for their vile infamy. To all men, except perhaps one. How dark it was in that chamber of contemplation. Barely could one discern, by the light of a feeble candle atop a human skull, placed directly on the table, the hourglass, the bread, the water, the sulfur, the salt, and the mercury. The flickering light illuminated the image of a rooster depicted on one of the walls of this cramped chamber, while on the opposite side was inscribed vitriol. Lost in my reveries, my attention focused on the undulating glow of the incandescent luminary. I saw this waking dream through the flames. Knights in armor, guided by a woman, fighting for the preservation of some precious object, then perishing, all massacred by the soldiers of some monarch. The silhouette, the face, the posture of the woman seemed familiar to me. I had seen her many times in the recurring dreams I had had lately. Suddenly realizing where I was and what I, Katerina, had come to do, I quickly regained my composure. I had come to Prague in this month of May 1787 to infiltrate, on behalf of our congregation, the lodges of those who work from noon till midnight between columns B and J. Our congregation was a secular order of witches who worshipped Hecate and had sworn to contribute to the downfall of man in order to establish chaos above order. As far back as I could remember, I had known only the prerogatives of the congregation during my childhood and youth. A young orphan, born into a noble but poor family in the kingdom of Bohemia, I had been taken in by the Scarlet sisters, who, devoted to the cause of their high priestess Lilith, whose age and appearance defied the centuries she had traversed, had entrusted me to her care. Lilith hated the order imposed by man on nature. Above all, she hated men in general, and all institutions from which women were excluded. Lilith possessed colossal powers. She had the ability to move any being or object she visualized by will alone, could know the hidden secrets of the past and the future, could compel certain demons of the abyss to obey her commands, could materialize her desires in the physical world or in the ether, and could take control of any being in this world, be it animal, vegetable, or mineral. In the past, she had contributed to the creation of the golem in Prague, and at other times, with the help of famous enchanters, she had instilled the essence of black magic into Prague society. Lilith was of enchanting beauty that charmed anyone who met her, men, women, and animals alike. Her fiery hair shone with a fiery light in the darkness, and her deep eyes of green tinged with brown pierced the heart and soul of anyone who crossed her path. Her powers were at their peak during the new moon Sabbaths, and it was during these ceremonies that she harvested the prana of the beings offered to her in sacrifice by her followers. Lilith tolerated no contradiction, tolerated no other authority but her own. The prerequisite for being integrated into the congregation was to have the ruby seal of fire engraved in one's flesh. To be red-haired, sometimes certain red-haired men were tolerated as personal slaves, to have an impetuous temperament, and great aptitude in mastering the dark arts. A few called and very few chosen succeeded in joining the congregation. I was one of them. Those who failed had the privilege of being offered to her as a sacrifice. During my education, Lilith constantly put me to the test, so that I would toughen up and develop my own powers without mental barriers or ethical constraints. For her, only the strongest survived in this world. Although she never directly participated in my lessons, Lilith watched all my progress with a keen eye and placed great hopes in me. I was to be the instrument of her will through which the apocalypse of men was to come. Lilith had powerful enemies. The Emperor first, who had sworn to burn her alive. Then the congregation of the necromancers, an ancient rival faction. And finally, the new Masonic offspring, who, working for the glory and advancement of man, irritated her to the highest degree. The Emperor, or rather the successive emperors, had never been able to lay hands on her, due to her gifts and her singularly enchanting aura. To her and her soldiers, they were thus not a serious threat, and she even neglected the most elementary precautions to avoid being noticed by the profane world. It was different with the congregation of the necromancers. The men of this congregation also had exceptional gifts of materialization, invocation, teleportation, and projection into all planes of consciousness and existence. They lived secluded in underground palaces and also needed to collect the prana of lesser beings to maintain their powers and existence. Thus, during sacrificial ceremonies, they practiced on innocent young women whose will had been annihilated by the use of drugs, barbaric acts mixing sexual depravity, torture, and soul collection. For ages, they had fought the sisters in bloody confrontations from which no winner or loser emerged. In order to definitively achieve final victory, one or the other of the rival factions, of equivalent power, had to obtain more powers. The necromancers and the sisters coveted an ancient source of occult knowledge, the Book of the Abyss, a compilation of invocations of demons and entities from the depths of chaos whose powers surpassed those of the goddess Hecate. They were the primordials, those engendered at the dawn of time. They had originally ruled as absolute masters in another plane of existence and, when they had attempted to penetrate into ours countless eons ago, they had been thwarted in their desire for conquest and had been expelled and forever imprisoned in the depths of chaos. Some necromancers had, in the past, succeeded in summoning a minor entity of chaos, trying to control it in order to use its vast powers to their advantage. At that distant time, the Book of the Abyss was only an incomplete fragment of a collection of spells, and if it was possible to summon demons, no mention was made of the means to be employed to conjure them. Launching, avid and blinded by their thirst for power, into the ritual of the Great Evocation, the necromancers had materialized a minor entity of the shadow, without any protection or conjuration sigil, believing themselves so powerful that they could not be dominated by such a creature. Yet that's exactly what happened. The entity took control of the weakest necromancer and, turning him into a bloodthirsty creature, almost decimated all the members of their congregation. It had to be exterminated using formidable weapons and powerful spells, which forced the entity to retreat into the chaos. Closing the breach between the worlds opened by the invocation, the necromancers banned the use of this invocation and hid the book so that no being could use it again under these conditions, without a magical protection shield available. Eons passed, and the memory of the book became more present in the minds of the necromancers' congregation. There was a rumor circulating that the book they held was incomplete, and that the other part, dealing with the conjuration of the summoned entities, was held by the Scarlet congregation. Thus, possessing the complete book meant seizing the other half held by rival factions, invocations among the necromancers, conjuration among the Scarlet sisters. That is why these two factions had been in conflict for ages, in order to collect the other half of the book. And rather than forming an alliance, they preferred to forcibly seize what the other held, in order to retain the full power provided by the book. So I had gone to Prague to infiltrate the ranks of a Masonic society, knowing in advance that it harbored a member of the necromancer congregation, a certain Ethan. My mission was to seduce this necromancer, to enchant him so that he would lead me directly to the book. To do this, I could use all means at my disposal: enchantment, red magic, sexual, corruption, prevarication, etc. Prague was the ideal city for magicians of all orders. Since Emperor Rudolph II had brought to his court John Dee, the astrologer of Queen Elizabeth, and Edward Kelly, his medium, the city had experienced an unprecedented spiritual boom and had become the international capital of esotericism. Dr. Faust had worked there, and his home had the gloomy reputation of being haunted by the devil himself. Nonsense. The Scarlet sisters had acquired it, and had transformed it into headquarters in order to intrigue within the city itself. Seeking by all means to find the fragment of the book hidden by the necromancers, the sisters infiltrated all levels of society in order to forge fertile alliances and use their networks for their own ends. The sisters had dispatched numerous spies and henchmen to explore the institutional monuments of the city, such as the Jewish cemetery, the astronomical clock tower, the Charles Bridge, and the Emperor's Castle. They had turned every nook, every hiding place, every wall of these monuments, without success. Angered by these repeated failures, Lilith had decided to change strategy, and had entrusted me with this mission to the Masonic necromancer. Before setting out to infiltrate the discreet society, the Scarlet sisters and I had gathered to perform the grand ritual of red magic, namely to cast a love enchantment spell on the targeted necromancer. Under a blood-red moon, we had all together prayed to Hecate, in order to concentrate our powers and crystallize our will on our target. In order to seal the pact between Hecate and myself, aimed at making me irresistible to my target, we had sacrificed some young virgins and had practiced among ourselves and our slavemen rituals of sexual magic in which blood and semen were mixed and consumed to invigorate our vital energies. At the end of this ceremony, I had been sent to Prague, and thanks to our vast network of accomplices, had been able to approach the Masonic brothers and join their society. The initiation went smoothly. I managed to easily conceal my true intentions and pass the tests, and when I was presented with the mirror that was supposed to show me my fiercest enemy, that is to say myself, I had great difficulty in hiding my amusement, for my true enemy, the necromancer, himself held the mirror in his hands. I thus joined the lodge, and during the first meetings, I had to keep silent, which did not prevent me from approaching, during the banquets, my target and beginning to seduce him. After some exchanges, I managed to arouse his interest, and we began to see each other outside of the meetings. I informed the sisters of each of my progress, and we stood ready to deal him the fatal blow as soon as the opportune moment arrived. The more time passed, the more I exchanged with him, the more his personality intrigued me, and the more I felt drawn to him. As we exchanged, a strange chemistry arose within me, and it became increasingly difficult for me to conceal my true intentions from him. Something about him intrigued me. Something about him seemed to echo my being, and when I was in his presence, time had no hold over my reason. I truly felt as though I was facing my own reflection, so similar were his thoughts and feelings to mine, appearing to me then as my true twin flame. I had never experienced such emotions, and this necromancer, Ethan, over the hours spent with him, had almost succeeded in making me forget my primary mission. This change in attitude was soon noticed by the sisters, and they decided to precipitate the necromancer into the trap we had set for him sooner than planned, so that I would not betray myself by some ill-considered act or word, and thus betray the congregation. Under the favor of a full moon, I proposed to the necromancer to join me at the sisters' domain, indicating to him that I had a revelation to make to him. Of course, it was a trap, and to my surprise, I had some reservations about using such artifice against him. When he arrived at the castle, I was alone to greet him. The sisters had concealed themselves in the surrounding forests, and the stratagem consisted of leading him to the place of the great question after having enchanted him and drugged him if necessary. The sisters had carte blanche from Lilith, busy with some other important tasks and not available at that precise moment, to obtain by force and cunning all the necessary information for the collection of the book. When he arrived at the castle, he showed a real interest in the building and wanted to learn more about my own history. He questioned me about my origins, and I told him that I had been taken in by a community of devoted women who were involved in spirituality. Eager to learn more, he questioned me about our archives, and I had to lead him to the library where he perused the various works that our order had collected for ages. When he finished, a strange gleam filled his eyes, as if he had understood my true intentions. I pretended to show him other curiosities outside, to lead him directly to the altar of sacrifice. There the Scarlet sisters awaited him to question him. We crossed the dark halls, left the castle, and entered the forest, and after many detours, we reached the place of his ordeal. When he arrived, the sisters rushed upon him and encircled him. He must have been prepared for such trickery because he remained impassive and slowly turned his head in my direction. Then, staring me up and down, he fixed his eyes on me and opened his arms. I understood then that he was about to cast a spell upon me. The air around me began to blow like a hurricane. Clouds of dark mist darkened my vision, and while I saw the sisters suffocate for lack of breathable air, I was caught in an energetic whirlwind that paralyzed me. I couldn't take my eyes off his hypnotic gaze, and his will controlled all my actions. I realized then, too late, that this necromancer, Ethan, had deceived me. He too had been tasked by his own to approach me, seduce me, and lead him directly to our lair, so that he could seize our most precious possessions, the book foremost among them. He was indeed a false twin flame, whose dark intentions had just come to light, to use me, plunder us, and destroy us. He had almost succeeded when I managed to turn away from his paralyzing gaze. I gathered all my strength, and in one last surge of energy, I lunged towards him, a sacrificial dagger in hand. Surprised by this maneuver, he stepped aside and struck the altar nearby, falling to the ground. In my momentum, I stumbled and fell upon him, plunging the dagger deep into his heart. And as I saw him agonize, far from providing the satisfaction expected from his death, I then felt an absolute emptiness engulf me. The connection I had perceived with him was nothing but an illusion of my mind. He had made me experience new emotions that had captivated me and falsely convinced me of the nature of his thoughts and actions. And above all, I had believed myself much stronger than him. We, the sisters of the Scarlet congregation, had thought ourselves far superior to the necromancers. Fatal mistake. The subterfuge he had shown had decimated the congregation, and only Lilith the Eternal remained of the Scarlet sisters, strangely absent from this sacrificial ceremony. Projecting my being into the depths of possible futures, I came to the conclusion that my entire existence had been a succession of dark manipulations. It filled me with horror and chilled my blood. In one final movement of despair, I turned the dagger against myself and pierced my own heart. This life here below had lost all interest, all justification, and it must end now. My agony was brief. As I took my last breath, I still had the vision of that noble blonde woman in armor leading her companions to death. Then that vision turned into a distorted perception of the aura and power of the sisters, which, from Scarlet, darkened, reflecting the heinous stratagems they had always deployed towards me, which had led me to despair and ultimately to my downfall. This final vision was soon supplanted by the entrance of my soul into the black and unfathomable night of death.
I, Saul Racket, have been dreaming since my earliest childhood. Waking dreams, sleeping dreams. I have not always easily distinguished between the two. Growing up lonely, I found myself often left to my own devices, despite the affection of loving parents and grandparents. As an only child, I invented extraordinary worlds and imaginary friends with whom I could converse and share, lacking real companionship. I imagined traveling through time and space from exotic realms to distant lands inhabited by strange people with mysterious powers. Fascinated by the stars, I loved observing them at night with the naked eye and, aided by the telescope my father had given me, I scanned the horizon in search of other worlds, other peoples, searching for friends and siblings I did not have. In one of my dreams, I saw an oceanic planet in a neighboring constellation send one of its own to the far reaches of their system to be transformed into a human computer. In another dream, a priest from a vast island in the middle of the oceans battled fierce enemies, while another priest in a distant land tried to escape assailants by carrying a precious tome in his hands. Soon joined by a blonde warrior in armor fighting to preserve her home, from which in Scarlet which escaped, riding her broomstick and flying into the sky under a blood-red moon. As I grew older, I abandoned my waking dreams to become passionate about technology, science, and computers. I devoted myself to the study of computer science and taught myself programming. After a few years, my achievements, once stumbling, astonished those around me. My programs were innovative for their time, deciphering ancient symbols, creating music and art, analyzing the human genome. I enjoyed delving into all fields of knowledge. And I loved challenges. Hacking into institutional systems was a highly stimulating pastime during which I could unleash my creativity, generating a virus here to gain complete control over the targeted structure, or opening a security breach there and siphoning the contents of selected databases. Yet, this activity did not provide as much satisfaction as expected. I found it too easy, therefore boring in the long run, and above all, immoral. After all, men had spent months or even years deploying ingenuity to design and implement these security systems, which I had barely taken a few hours to overcome. This realization came to me when I learned that the father of one of my classmates, responsible for the cybersecurity of his company, had been fired because of me. Even though I anonymously detailed my attack technique to the targeted company, trying to rectify my fatal mistake, it was in vain because ultimately this man had lost his job and, over time, found himself and his family in a state of great hardship. So, I swore to myself to no longer act childish, out of challenge and pride, and to use my skills to help others rather than amusing myself at their expense. As a young adult, however, I had another dream in which I saw a machine in the shape of a sphere, controlled by an old man, into which one could project all one's visions, memories, and feelings. Upon waking, I knew immediately that I would dedicate my life to realizing this dream. That old man would be me in a few years, and I would be the one to build that machine first. I embarked on engineering studies in computer science, which bored me greatly, quickly followed by a doctorate in neuroscience, in order to combine computer science and the science of the human brain, accumulating the necessary knowledge to realize my dream. During this doctorate, while studying the functioning of neural networks, I understood the similarity between brain function and quantum computer networks. And I came up with the idea of combining artificial intelligence and brainwave decryption to try to decipher the human thought system. So, I set to work and first studied the best way to collect brain signals in a non-invasive manner, without electrodes implanted in the brain. I first turned to electrical waves, electroencephalograms, but it was particularly difficult to differentiate the intricate signals from various brain sources, and I quickly abandoned this path. I then turned to magnetic resonance imaging, which was very interesting because it was easily achievable and had good anatomical specificity. However, this technique had major flaws. It did not allow access to real-time information due to its information sampling type, and it was necessary to repeat the acquisitions made during experiments many times in order to collect a signal free from noise. So, I also abandoned this path to turn to magnetoencephalography. In preliminary experiments, I had discovered a way to separate the magnetic waves generated by the brain in such a specific manner that one could isolate very delicate brain activity centers and analyze them in a relevant way. However, the available equipment, huge and non-mobile, did not cover the entire brain and proved to be too simplistic and complex to use. I needed to invent and create my own brain investigation tools. As a young graduate, I went to the city in London where my parents had some acquaintances to raise funds to create my brain functioning analysis company, Cortex. After showing my preliminary results to astonished investors, I easily obtained from them a starting capital to launch my company, on the condition that I repay them within 3 years, of course with interest. I then found partners to join me, a businessman, an expert in cybernetics and neural networks, and a psychiatrist, and we set up our new offices in the heart of the city. The 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. We devoted all our energy to designing a device that was lightweight, portable, and accurate enough to record brainwaves in any circumstances. We recruited the best developers specializing in artificial intelligence, algorithms, and signal processing to design the software system that would allow us to decode brainwaves and access the human mind. At the end of these 3 years, we managed just in time to produce a functional prototype of our system for the investors. And I still remember their astonishment when we placed one of our helmets on their heads and projected their own thoughts onto a computer screen in real time. We had succeeded. We had reached a decisive milestone. The news quickly leaked to the media, and we experienced our moment of glory. Acquisition proposals, partnerships, capital flowed from everywhere to develop and commercialize our system. The potential applications were simply phenomenal. From the sick unable to communicate to those who wanted to record their dreams and thoughts, passing through lie detectors and memory sharing, all of human society could benefit from this new technology. The following years saw us grow exponentially, and from a small startup in the beginning, we built a gigantic multinational corporation, the world's leading company in terms of revenue and profits. However, the enthusiasm of the early days of research gave way to a commercial routine of a large corporation that was starting to weigh on me, and gradually, I drifted away from the society I had founded, leaving my original partners in power. That's when I met you. You appeared to me, splendid, one afternoon near Covent Garden, your azure blue eyes illuminating my life in a fraction of a second. You seemed so familiar, as if I had known you well in the past, when I had just seen you for the first time. You also stared at me insistently, and it was you who approached me first. What you said to me then will be forever engraved in my memory.
Hello, sir. Please excuse my boldness, but as I look at you, I have a strange impression, a feeling of déjà vu, of already knowing, as if we had already met and had once lived an entire life alongside each other.
I was stunned, speechless, not knowing what to say, even though I had exactly the same impression. Then, smiling at me, you said,
Forgive me, I must have been mistaken. My mind sometimes has some whimsical hallucinations.
And you immediately disappeared. I searched for you all day in the nearby streets, to no avail. And in the following days, I returned to the same place, hoping to see you again, preparing what I would say to approach you, and invariably returning empty-handed at the end of the day. You obsessed me. I had lost my appetite, my sleep, and my interest in the work that I had completely lost. For me, who had focused my entire existence on the realization of my work, on this immense work, at this precise moment, it had no value. Then one day, as I lost hope of seeing you again at last, you appeared to me again. Not in Covent Garden, but at a charity event organized to raise funds for terminally ill patients. My company being a generous donor, I had been invited to this gala. When I saw you, I had to overcome my apprehension to approach you, and it was not easy. My company being internationally recognized, my face was familiar from magazine covers, so I was not a stranger, and it was you who came to meet me once again. We talked for a long time, rhymed, and shared views so similar that it seemed downright unreal. We exchanged contact information, saw each other again, and finally united. And from that moment on, you forever entered my life and my heart, and you upset the course of my existence. You loved nature, serenity, calm, vast ocean expanses, travels to the ends of the world to meet peoples and experience their daily lives. You hated artifices, lies, vile, manipulative, and self-interested beings, and you had the innate ability to perceive the deep intentions of your interlocutors. You didn't need my technology for that. You had the gift. I didn't know why, but you reminded me of a dream I had as a child, in which, as a little boy, I sat by the sea and, listening to the waves, dreamed of you. You appeared to me then with sublime beauty, just as I now perceived you. Together we traveled the lands and oceans of the world, and over the next few years, we developed an astonishing synchronicity, you completing the sentences I started, me feeling what you didn't say. Both of us knowing what the other was experiencing even when we were separated by a huge distance. One day, you gave me the immense joy of announcing that we were going to start a family, that you were expecting a little being who would be the best of both of us, that I was going to be a father. I exulted with joy. I was also very worried because I knew you were of fragile health, and I feared that things would not go well during pregnancy or childbirth. The 8 months that followed were very stimulating as we prepared for the arrival of our firstborn, but also very anxious, with medical visits and repeated health checks that deteriorated over time. On that fateful Friday morning, you left me forever, and you took with you the unborn child we cherished. I could do nothing during childbirth when things went wrong, and you had that cataclysmic hemorrhage that took you away. I was devastated. For me, this existence had no reason to be. I had lost you forever. I had lost our child forever. Everything was collapsing around me. There's no point in building an empire if you can't share it with those you cherish. Driven by the burning desire to find you again, I came up with the idea of projecting your images and memories of you into a vast computer simulation so that you could live again, so that I could see you again and be by your side again. But your image and memory were no longer enough for me. I needed to be able to spend the rest of my life with you again. That's when I started studying the possibility of transferring my consciousness into a centralized artificial intelligence that would allow me to build a virtual world in which we could both evolve and create our common future. Tasking the best scientists and doctors on the planet, I invested colossal sums in creating brain hybridization equipment to achieve my goals, and underwent numerous neurosurgical procedures to be able to transfer my consciousness into a thinking machine. Having assigned all my scientific and development teams to the creation of this cyber brain that could host my consciousness and bring you back to life, I invested all my fortune in this project. Knowing that the journey I was about to embark on would be one way, I resigned from the company I had founded and entrusted what remained of my shares to my most competent associate to grow our company, the product of our labor. Months passed and Cortex gradually took shape. The Central Artificial Intelligence, named after our company, became self-aware on October 13, 2037 at 7:59 p.m. After performing all routine tests and checking the system's stability, everything was ready for me to take the leap. To leave this world without you, and to find you on the other side of the mirror in the virtual universe I had created for us. As I prepared to enter the chamber that would connect my mind to Cortex, a clamor grew louder and louder in the laboratory where I was. Employees, researchers, all staff were in turmoil, panicked. A phenomenal news had just been announced in the media. Spaceships from outer space had just penetrated Earth's atmosphere and were flying over the world's major capitals. Humanity had been hoping for a close encounter of the third kind with an extraterrestrial civilization for decades, and we had developed highly advanced observation and transspatial communication tools to achieve this. We had finally managed to attract the attention of some other civilization, but we would have been better off remaining silent because the intentions of these beings from elsewhere were not friendly. The main cities on the west coast of the United States were the first to suffer attacks. Then came New York, Boston, Washington, then Paris, Berlin, and finally our city, London. Their death machines used a singular technology that preserved monuments, machines, and animals and exterminated all humans. As our armed response to the aggression was awaited, and just as I heard the screams of terror from the employees, I closed the chamber on myself and initiated the process of transferring my consciousness into this centralized whole. While through the laboratory security cameras I saw my body in the transfer chamber disintegrate, I felt myself being sucked into a tunnel of light towards other horizons of consciousness. Then darkness fell. I now navigate the cyberspace, where I can explore all worlds, all epochs, all universes known to man through this vast simulation. I experiment with incantations and spells with the magicians of Imperial Prague, I visit the vaulted cellars of the Templar commanderies in search of lost treasures. I stroll among the pyramids of ancient Egypt or within the temples of Atlantis and the continent of Mu. I traverse galaxies to meet other civilizations from a distant past or a hypothetical future. I am the only being of my kind to have succeeded in transferring my consciousness into a thinking machine before the Great Annihilation, and I feel very alone now. Of humanity, little remains but the origin. For now I am made up of photons and electrons moving within a vast network of interconnected computers. Fortunately, I find you there, at the top of the vast mountains overlooking the ocean of the planet Ties and the constellation of Cassiopeia. You haven't changed. You are still that lovely young brunette with azure blue eyes and a dreamy air that I have always known, who has accompanied me on all my journeys through time and space, who has assisted me in all my endeavors, and who has constantly watched over me. You smile at me, take my hand, and together we head towards the brilliant light of the grand architect of the origin of worlds.
I awaken on this hospital bed, disturbed by the deafening noise of the machines keeping me alive. I no longer know who I am or what era I am in. I can barely grasp why I am lying on this bed, as my consciousness is clouded. The nurse comes to see me and murmurs something I do not understand. I cannot express myself or move my limbs. I am paralyzed. I suddenly become aware of my condition, and my medical knowledge resurfaces in my memory, indicating that I must have suffered a massive stroke that has robbed me of the use of my limbs and speech. I feel very isolated from a world with which I can no longer communicate. A few days pass, and my consciousness has moments of lucidity. I recall my past life, the mistakes I made, and the wrongs I committed against my loved ones that distanced me from them and led me into solitude and social and emotional misery. It is now too late to ask for their forgiveness. I cannot communicate with them anyway. Occasionally, I have visions, hallucinations. I catch glimpses of galactic civilizations, temples, knights, mages, and a thinking supercomputer. I have a waking dream in which I see a lovely young brunette with azure blue eyes smiling at me and holding my hand. These visions haunt me. When I become a little more lucid, I remember the sad reality of my existence that will soon come to an end. No one is waiting for me on the other side. There is no other side. None of these visions are real. They are the product of my imagination, of my brain, which, knowing it is dying, seeks by all means to live for a few more moments the lives it would have liked to live. I am nothing here, nor anything elsewhere, and have never been anything. I am merely a dreamer who invented other lives to bear the weight of an existence without interest and without joy, to bear the weight of the loss of loved ones who could never be replaced and who left an abyssal void in my heart. One last time, I turn my thoughts to the stars, to those majestic places where all dreams are achievable, if only one applies oneself with great imagination. And now, the darkness envelopes me.